Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to begin with some brief background information. Could you tell us where you went to law school?
I went to Cleveland Marshall College of Law.
And what do you do?
I'm currently the judge of the Lakewood Municipal Court. I've held that position for next month will be 30 years.
And how long have you been practicing in Cleveland?
Well, since I graduated from law school, which would have been 1977.
And how long have you been a member of the law library?
Since that time.
How did you first find out about us?
Well, my first job out of law school was a law clerk in the Court of Appeals in this building to Judge John V. Corrigan. And again, they call them staff attorneys now. We were law clerks back then. But obviously the job of a law clerk is to advise the judge, and that means a lot of writing, a lot of research. And the Court of Appeals had a good but limited library. So many times myself and the law clerks were hopping on the elevator and going up the 2 floors to here to look at other books. We had we did not have the Federal Reporter, as I was trying to recall. So if we had to look at federal cases for opinions to advise the judge, we would have to come up here. A lot of other type of specialty or books that the Court of Appeals just didn't have in their own library. They had a lot of state things, state reporters, but that was about it. So we would have to come up here a lot, and because our job was to advise the judge and find any cases on point, and also from different states, different jurisdictions. So you had to go to the Southwest Reporter in those days from West or things like that, and shepherdize, and shepherdize meant pulling out those brown burgundy books and going through site by site, looking at pocket parts, and it's not like today where you can just, when it says shepherdize and you are on Lexus or Westlaw and you just hit something and it goes up. So it was especially as a new lawyer, it's a wonderful tool to learn all what's available to do legal research.
And how often do you visit the law library now?
Not as much, unfortunately, and part of that is because so much is on electronic media, like as I said, Lexus, Westlaw, things like that, and being stuck out in the suburbs, I don't get downtown very often. But when I did work downtown, this was I used it long after my stint working in the Court of Appeals.
Would you say a lot has changed at the Cleveland Law Library over the years?
It's interesting, walking in today, some of it looks exactly the same, and some of it's changed, so a little bit of both.
And has the law library helped you with any landmark cases throughout your career?
I saw that question, I was thinking about it, and yes, there were 2. One, again, as a law clerk to John V. Corrigan. He was assigned as a presiding judge on a case that involved, I'm not showing my age, but the recall of Mayor Dennis Kucinich. And the law at the time, and I'm paraphrasing, but the number of signatures on the petition had to be 15% of the number of the voters in the last gubernatorial election. Well, the issue came down to, did it mean 15% of the number of people who voted, or did the people who signed the petition have to be 50% of those who actually did vote in the election? And if it went one way, the petitions were insufficient and there would be no recall, and if it went the other way, there would be a recall. And we spent, the law clerks of the 3 judges and the judges spent, it was a special case set up in the summer, and in those days the Court of Appeals took a recess in the summer, and we were here every day, going back, because the statute was silent, the cases were silent, and we were going back to the original laws 100, 200 years ago, and looking at other jurisdictions and how they interpret the law. And because this was a case that was not only a landmark decision, but one that was obviously had great public appeal, and where we're going to recall the mayor of the city of Cleveland, and it depended on what we found. So yeah, that was one where we did a lot of work, and the resources up here were phenomenal. And by the way, the judges held at the petitions were sufficient, and to recall history, that the recall election went forward, but he was not recalled. A second case I was thinking about is as a county prosecutor. When I left here, I joined the county prosecutor's office as a civil prosecutor, and I represented various county officers, county agencies, and I was assigned to a writ of prohibition that against Judge Ford, who was a visiting judge who came in here, and it involved with State XREL, Dow Chemical versus Judge Ford, and it involved, the case involved bricks that were falling off buildings in Cleveland because of the adhesive. And there were bricks falling at random off on 9th Street in St. Clair in various buildings because of the chemical that had been used. And the issue in that case was whether the judge could order out-of-state employees of the party to come into the state to testify. They were saying, obviously, you have to subpoena these people, and subpoena only goes to the borders of the state of Ohio, and therefore these people were in Michigan, and the judge could not order them. So when the judge did order them, they filed a writ of prohibition. I was assigned to represent the judge, and we had to go back over 100 years of law to find it out. And one of the things that was amazing about that, and I've got to do a quick shout out to Mr. Fisk, is the rules of civil procedure came into effect in 1970. So we had to go back beyond that to the old code pleadings. I found out that when the rules came into effect, the Rules Committee, the Civil Rules Committee, met, and there was a court reporter and a transcript. And in the transcript, the committee went through every civil rule, compared it to the statute, to say, how do we want to make these changes with the rules coming into the state of Ohio? It's a major issue. We could not find that transcript. And again, the judge I had worked for, John V. Corrigan, was the chairman of the Rules Committee. He said, there's a transcript somewhere, we have this. And we looked everywhere. We looked at the Western Reserve Historical Society, nobody could find it. Arthur Fisk found it. There was one copy. It was in the Supreme Court library, and he called me because I came up here, and he called me. So let me check. And 2 days later, he called and said we found it. And I said, can you ship it up here? And he said no, because it's their only copy. And in those days, copying wasn't easy. But they said, well, what they'll do is they've got it on reserve for you. So I went down to Columbus. I walked in there. I told them my name. Mr. Fisk had already told them I was coming. They said, you're going to see this other gentleman. He took me over there. They took me in a room just like this, and a box full of transcripts over there that they had ready for me so we wouldn't have to wait. I mean, he was just a big help that I could go through, find out what I need, and then get on 71 and drive back here. But his intervention to help me find this transcript and then to be able to get right to it was wonderful. And we ended up prevailing in that case too.
That's a great memory. Are there any other memories about staff, past or present, that you could think of?
Off the top of my head, just Mr. Fisk. He was my go-to guy. And I say that because he always had an answer. He could, if it existed, he found it. And if it didn't exist, he let me know. But he was one of those wonderful public servants that would do whatever is necessary when called upon to help attorneys. And like I said, I was just either a law clerk or a young assistant county prosecutor. I wasn't anybody, but it didn't matter who you were. If you walked in there and said, I can't find something, he usually said, well, let's come on back here, I'll take you there, like you did for me a couple of weeks ago. Or he said, we'll find it. And many times we would be calling some of the major law firms, Jones Day, Squire Sanders in those days, that would maybe they might have reporters that had limited appeal in the county law library wouldn't have, but then he would make arrangements either to borrow it or me to go over those firms and be able to use those resources. So he was the man, and just a wonderful person to work with.
And are there any other special memories you wanted to share today?
Of Mr. Fisk?
Anything?
Just what a wonderful person he was. I think he always spoke in hushed voice. I think he was born to be a librarian, and I think that was his natural tone. But just, he was a friendly person. We got to know each other. We would talk about families and other things. It was more than just a legal relationship, but he was just very friendly, very helpful.
Would you say a lot has changed in legal practice since you started your career?
Oh, sure, especially in research, and because now it's all electronic. And in those days, you would come to a table and spread out books, and you would have to look at, read this, and this case went to that case. You didn't have a hyperlink where you could just click and find the case. You got up, you walked over the shelf, and you found it, and hopefully it was there, and that somebody else wasn't reading it. And as I said, you went through pocket parts, and then you had to shepherdize, and today, if I find a case on point, within seconds I can find out if it's good law or bad law. In the old days, it would take maybe a half hour to find it, and especially going back, one as a law clerk to a judge, I had to make sure that I gave that judge the proper legal authority. The last thing I want to do is tell him to rely on a case that had been reversed or had been statutorily changed. And the same with the lawyer. The last thing you want to do is argue a case that's no longer good law to a judge and find that and put yourself and your client in an embarrassing situation. So it's a lot easier now than it was then, physically going at the books, but there's a lot to be said for the books. I still use the books at work.
Are there any lessons you'd like to share that you've learned in the course of your career?
When doing research, read the whole case. The problem I have seen with lawyers is today they go online, they do a word search, they find that they'll go to paragraph 25, which will cover the issue they're looking for without looking at the entire case. And many times I've had lawyers cite cases to me, or I'm also, for the last 15 years, I have been on the faculty of the Ohio Judicial College, and now also the chairman of the Ohio Jury Instruction Committee for the state of Ohio and the Judicial Conference. And a lot of times cases will be cited for the wrong reason. So in other words, they will, you read a case and it might say, this was the issue and the case is affirmed. Well, the case wasn't affirmed on that issue. The case is affirmed perhaps because the other side didn't file a transcript and the Court of Appeals never got into the issue. But too often, I think with a lot of the younger attorneys, the research is limited to the 2 or 3 paragraphs in the case without reading the entire decision. And just because the Court of Appeals may have said something, it doesn't mean that that was necessarily the holding of the case.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.